Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
Hey, really glad you're with us for the Wednesday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. We've got a lot to talk about again today, so let's dive right into it. And Jim, some days we torture news into making it a good martini, but today we've actually got a double-fisted good martini based on real-life actual election results. So let's talk about both of these. First of all, out in Portland, Oregon, which has been ground zero for nearly 4 years now of just insane leftist behavior, ongoing violence, attacking the federal courthouse out there for at least weeks, if not months on end, homeless encampments, drug use and drug-related crimes through the roof. Portland, a once beautiful city, certainly has sections now that are an absolute disaster. And the guy who became prosecutor about 4 years ago is Mike Schmidt. He was up for re-election last night, and his progressive philosophy towards super duper compassion for criminals, that did not go over well. Even in Portland, they're fed up with this guy and his approach to the law. And so a guy named Nathan Vasquez looks to be the next district attorney there. The results are still coming in. You know, Oregon is one of those mail-in states, so they're getting paper cuts, opening up the envelopes right now. But given the vote totals we have so far, looks pretty promising for Mr. Vasquez. Last night, it looked like he had about 58% of the vote. Now it's 56%, and they say with the expected outstanding vote, that's not going to change. This is what he had to say last night, Jim, as he was confident he would be elected when all the votes were in. Quote, "I am committed to ending the open-air drug use, to ending the open-air drug dealing that we have suffered from as a community. I am also committed to restoring the idea that it's okay to hold people accountable and do it in a compassionate manner." Meanwhile, in Georgia, the only Supreme Court seat up for grabs yesterday, the more conservative candidate, the incumbent Justice Andrew Pinson, who was appointed by Governor Kemp in 2022, wins a 6-year term. He was running against former Democratic Congressman John Barrow, who back in the day was considered kind of a blue dog Democrat. But in running for the court, he made it pretty much all about abortion and saying that we needed a Supreme Court justice in Georgia who is going to stand up for the rights of women. So, Jim, long way to go, a lot more primaries, but we definitely will take the wins where we can get them, and we got 2 of them last night.
No, undoubtedly. Let me just begin by saying I don't know what was going through the head of Mike Schmidt. I don't understand why he went down this path. He had a great legacy as the greatest third baseman in Phillies history. And why he would just, I didn't even know he'd gotten a law degree and become it's a different Mike Schmidt. Okay, all right, that makes a little more sense. But dating myself with that reference. But yeah, so like this is a positive step, a needed step. It comes in the context of not just people in Portland in particular, but really all over Oregon, people who think of themselves as good Democrats, good progressives, folks on the left, living with the consequences of the policies they wanted. And believe it or not, making the mature assessment of, instead of doubling down on policies that did not work, looking at their streets, looking at the homeless population, looking at the widespread evidence of drug use and addiction and the extreme human cost of those addictions, and saying, this is not working. And, you know, you're seeing a big push towards decriminalizing drugs. I recommend the reporting of my colleague, Ryan Mills, who's been out there and talked to people who are like, quote unquote, good progressives, who are just looking at this and saying, this has ruined our neighborhoods. This has created so many far-reaching problems that we thought we would be making things better. We thought putting people in jail for drugs was causing problems. Decriminalization has made things much, much worse. And I love these arguments because it's not, you can't argue this is reefer madness. You can't argue this is some sort of paranoia. This is the lived experience. This is just absolute rationalism of, we did this because we thought it was going to make things better, and it has made things worse, a lot worse. It's time to undo this. And so the idea of, I am sure the likes of Mike Schmidt are like, it's crazy right-wing Republicans. No, it's not crazy right-wing Republicans pushing this. And as for the Supreme Court case in Georgia, a non-ironic way to go, Georgia. You've turned into the anti-Nevada. Although even Nevada's looking a little bit better these days. And I think that maybe there's another strong contender for our way to go state, which we'll talk about probably in our next Martini. Just one last note on Schmidt and kind of this whole Soros prosecutors, these guys who want to eliminate bail. They're kind of this rotating turnstile system of releasing violent criminals immediately after, to await trial. It wasn't that long ago. It was the Obama years where you saw this push towards criminal justice reform. And people forget, a lot of this was pushed by indisputably conservative Republicans. Started in Texas under Rick Perry, spread very quickly to Louisiana, Bobby Jindal, then to Chris Christie in New Jersey. I know some people are irked with Christie and don't think he was that conservative. But on this, he's a former prosecutor. This guy was law and order. And on each one of them, generally, the area of criminal justice reform that that I was most intrigued by, I saw, they talked about it at a couple of Koch network meetings, was anti-recidivism programs. This isn't about reducing sentences. This is, guys in jail. How do you make sure this guy gets out of jail and never goes back? How do you make sure he's got a prospects for a job afterwards? How do you make sure he's got either his GED or an education? How do you have a mentor program? If he's got a drug addiction, how do you treat that addiction? How do you put him back on the streets with the skills to make a decent living, a law-abiding living, and not end up right back with the same old, members of his gang or folks like that. It was a really good idea. It was a bipartisan idea. Everybody could get behind this. And progressive prosecutors and the likes of, the Soros-backed ones have ruined this. Nobody wants to do this anymore. Nobody wants to do anything. Everybody wants to lock them up and throw away the key. Way to go, progressives. You ruined it. Just like you always do.
All right, let's talk about our first great sponsor for today, and that is ZBiotics. Maybe there's some celebratory beverages in Multnomah County, Oregon last night, or in the state of Georgia with Justice Pinson's election victory. But hopefully they had some ZBiotics before they had those celebratory drinks. And ZBiotics is the pre-alcohol probiotic drink, and it's the world's first genetically engineered probiotic.
When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in your gut. It's this byproduct and not dehydration that's to blame for your rough morning the next day. ZBiotics produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. Just remember to make ZBiotics your first drink of the night, and then, as always, drink responsibly, and you will then feel your best the next morning.
They come in these little vials, kind of like your first shot. It's that easy, and then it goes to work and makes it so that you do not have that rough next morning if you've had moderation in your drinking. So go to zbiotics.com/3ml to get 15% off your first order when you use 3ml at checkout. ZBiotics is backed with 100% money-back guarantee, so if you are unsatisfied for any reason, they will refund your money, no questions asked. Visit zbiotics.com/3ml and use the code 3ml at checkout for 15% off. Thank you, ZBiotics, for co-sponsoring this episode and our good times. All right, Jim, on to our bad martini now. And if this sounds like a repeat of a story from 2 years ago, you're not far off. You might remember 2 years ago, there was an effort, of course, on the Republican side in Michigan to defeat Governor Gretchen Whitmer, the Democrat. And there were a number of candidates who looked to be strong, including James Craig, the former police chief in Detroit, and others who were gaining momentum heading closer and closer to the primary until there was a closer examination of the signatures gathered on petitions for 5 different gubernatorial candidates. 5 different candidates got bounced from the ballot. Tudor Dixon ended up being the nominee. It looked like she was going to be neck and neck. In the end, Whitmer wins by more than 10 points. Now, of course, in addition to the presidential race, the big contest in Michigan this year statewide is for the U.S. Senate. Debbie Stabenow is retiring. The Democrats have coalesced very quickly around Congresswoman Alyssa Slotkin, also a former CIA figure. On the Republican side, there are a number of prominent names in the race. The biggest two are former Congressman Mike Rogers, who I believe also has a history in the intelligence community, and then former Congressman Justin Amash. Former Congressman Peter Meyer had been in the race but decided to get out. But now the signatures for Rogers, who has a huge lead in the primary, by the way, Amash, businessman Sandy Pensler, and those submitted by Meyer, even though he's no longer in the race, are under investigation again by the State Board of Canvassers. And given the makeup of the state government in Michigan right now, I'm pretty sure those are not going to be the most friendly people, but hopefully they look at the evidence honestly. And Jim, we don't have a verdict yet, But if, in fact, for the second consecutive election cycle, the Republicans have either been too lazy to find out who they're hiring to collect signatures, or hiring actual loyalists to go out there, or potentially realizing that there might be some chicanery going on in some of these collection efforts that could put the Republicans in this position again, they've learned absolutely nothing. It's insane.
Greg, because Michigan is your home state, even if it's no longer where you reside, nor the home of your favorite NFL team, I will spare the state of Michigan a little bit from the.
Go ahead.
It's coming. And like I said, we're really in the neighborhood of. Way to go, Michigan. Way to go. Reading this story, I thought about this is not the only state Republican Party that's had some pretty serious problems. It's not the only swing state Republican Party that's had really serious problems. And generally, there's all kinds of problems, but generally it's dysfunction and disorganization, a lot of infighting, a lot of folks eager to prove I'm Trumpier than you and you're a sellout. And then the third thing is like when they're doing all this infighting, really lousy fundraising numbers. A couple of these state parties are just scraping along at the bottom of the barrel and barely enough funds together to keep the lights on and function. Never mind organize a big get out the vote operation in a presidential election year. You can overstate the value of having, campaign offices. Hillary Clinton had a lot more than Donald Trump, but you'd like to have some. You'd like to have at least some campaign infrastructure in place. And generally, the earlier you start on this, yeah, it costs more, but you start showing up in communities, you start knocking on doors. It's very hard to whip these things together in the last 3 weeks of an election. So Donald Trump, for all extents and purposes, has been the head of the Republican Party, certainly since he was the nominee in the summer of 2016, if not even before then. Trump's a little busy right now. He's spending his 4 weekdays a week in a courtroom in Manhattan. On those other spare days, he's doing his campaigning. I know that technically we have a head of the Republican National Committee, and we were so overwhelmed by Ronna Romney McDaniel and the performance over the last couple of years. But actually, wasn't she from Michigan?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Shouldn't that have been a red flag? Anyway, like the president, the president or the presidential candidate, like maybe we need somebody to be if Trump can't do it, and Trump has never been a detail guy, and you look at his Truth Social feed, how are the state parties doing? It's not high on his priority list, understandably, but somebody should be. And maybe it's the new guy at the RNC is going to be able to get things swinging. But generally, somebody needs to focus on the basic blocking and tackling of how these state parties are doing. And really, almost in the entire Trump era, Trump shooed away a whole bunch of people who were never Trump or who were not into him. Unfortunately, those were like the good managers. Those were the ones who actually had first of all, the good financial connections, the deep pockets, the big fundraising networks, and just the general managerial skill. Like the fact that you can be entertaining on social media doesn't mean you're necessarily good at running an organization. And that, unfortunately, is part of how these guys have gotten into how you get on Trump's radar and what makes you recognize him, what makes them think, oh yeah, this guy'd be good for this job. So the state parties are really in rough shape here. And as you point out in this one, like going out and collecting signatures, that is about the easiest task you're going to get in running for office. That's the first one. That is like the 200 points you get on the SAT, to foreshadow our third martini. That is the sort of thing you should be able to do in your sleep. And if you can't, you're really not the kind of person who should be running for public office.
No, it's very, very simple. Hire good people to do a very simple job. There are rules you need to follow. You may need to explain to people when they sign the petitions all the information that they need to provide there. It should be laid out pretty clearly. But for whatever reason, and we don't have a final verdict here yet, but if this has happened again, this is incompetence at the most basic level. The state party is certainly not helping things, having no money and having infighting. I think there's like competing chairmen of the party right now, if that hasn't been resolved yet. This is dysfunction in a state that should be fairly competitive. The latest poll, I think, had Rogers behind Slotkin 40-37. So both of them still working on some name recognition statewide. I think Slotkin would be the favorite if the race actually happens. But here's my advice to Michigan petition gatherers. If you want to do it right, talk to my mom. We have talked about my dad and his accomplishments as a small town mayor in the past. Things got on the ballot including his name, due to the tireless work of my mom, who, if you ran into her in the grocery store during petition signing season, she probably had one in her purse, whether it's about an issue to get on the ballot, a candidate, pro-life issues. As we mentioned before, she was very active in those, still is. She has turned in more signatures than anyone I know. Hers are always in perfect order. This isn't brain surgery, people. Do it right.
The lesson, always listen to Greg's mom.
You will avoid a lot of mistakes listening to my mom, I can tell you that. All right, let's talk about Lumen. That's another good way to avoid mistakes about what to eat during the day. Lumen is the world's first handheld metabolic coach. It's a device that measures your metabolism just through your breath. And on the app, which is easy to install, it lets you know if you're burning fat or carbs and gives you tailored guidance to improve your nutrition, workouts, sleep, and even stress management.
Your metabolism is your body's engine. It's how your body turns the food that you eat into the fuel that keeps you going. Because your metabolism is at the center of everything your body does, optimal metabolic health translates to a whole bunch of benefits, including easier weight management, improved energy levels, better fitness results, and even better sleep.
I said yesterday that all you had to do is be able to breathe to use Lumen. You do have to be able to read also, and that'll actually factor into our next martini. It'll tell you, right now you're burning carbs, so you should probably eat this, or you're burning fat, so you should probably eat this. It could not be simpler to use. So if you want to take the next step in improving your health, go to lumen.me and use 3ml to get your $100 off your Lumen. That's lumen.me, and use 3ml at checkout for $100 off. Again, that's lumen.me, code 3ml. Thank you, Lumen, for sponsoring this episode.
How much does it cost to live in your state? The Watchdog on Wall Street podcast with Chris Markowski. Every day, Chris helps unpack the connection between politics and the economy and how it affects your wallet. New studies show it costs a family of four over $177,000 to live comfortably. In Massachusetts, it's over $300,000. Government continues to put their hands in one industry after another. Whether it's happening in D.C. or down on Wall Street, it's affecting you financially. Be informed. Check out the Watchdog on Wall Street podcast with Chris Markowski on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
All right, Jim, on to our crazy martini now, and this will be a multifaceted one. The story that triggered all of this was one that I saw the other day from an outfit called the Chronicle for Higher Education, and it shows the lack of preparedness and lack of motivation of way too many college students. The title is College Students Can't or Won't Read, say profs. So some struggle literally with reading endurance and weak vocabulary. So they're going to college and then reading stuff and they don't know what these words mean because they haven't seen them before. And then some of them just don't want to read because they haven't had to do much reading in high school. They feel that grade inflation, for example, has gotten to the point where families are convinced that their kids are geniuses. And then when they get to college, they're shocked by how much more work they're expected to do. And they just don't want to do it. So they quote a professor here named Teresa McPhail, who teaches at the Stevens Institute of Technology, as well as other professors who say they've, watered down the list to fewer things that students are expected to read, and they still won't do that. And get this, Jim. Another professor says his students think writing 750 words in a paper is too much. That's 3 pages. So, Jim, if that's too much work, it's no wonder that we have some college students that aren't quite ready for the real world, and they have a major culture shock when they get here.
First of all you whiny college students out there, the typical Morning Jolt newsletter is 1,500 words. So every day before 9, a lot of days even before 8:30, I've written twice what you're supposed to do in a term paper, and it's pretty darn good. So stop whining. I'm glad you brought this up because it touched a nerve, something that's been very much on the mind here in the Garrity house. My older one will be applying for colleges next year, and close friends of ours, their kid went through the process of applying to college. He got into a perfectly good school, and he's going to be fine. Everything turned out. This is a very bright kid. Very high SAT scores, very good grades, and some of the outside extracurriculars were just literally sky high. I don't want to get into more specifics because I don't know if my friends want me talking about their kid. But let's just say, really good kid. Didn't get into a bunch of colleges that I thought would be at least have a shot, right? And so I'm like, wow, look, again, the kid's going to be fine. But there's kind of this sense like, wow, colleges have gotten really picky. And one possibility is that there's nothing less special, there's nothing more common than a moderately awesome kid in Northern Virginia. Everybody's got type A parents. Everybody's got their kids been pushing them to the limits. So maybe that's a factor. But I started looking at some numbers. Greg, you and I are Generation X. My frame of reference for applying to colleges is back when I was doing this back in the early 90s. And, at the time, I thought I was pretty good. My kids' SAT scores are way better than mine so far. And not the most shocking thing, but so I went back and I checked. It was always difficult to get into an Ivy League school. But I looked it up. In 1993, the average SAT of someone who got into Harvard University was 1390. All right, that's pretty darn high. Remember, this is out of 1,600. 1390. Okay, that's pretty high. Now, they've changed the scoring a bit since then, and people say, everybody does a little bit better on the new test. By 2020, the average score, not the high, the average at Harvard was 1520 out of a possible 1,600. Right, so you look at it, you're like, whoa! All right. I looked for similar numbers. I found numbers for 1990. Cornell University, Ivy League. People forget, back then it accepted 29% of applicants, and it was considered a pretty selective school. Now, I like my odds if I'm, got a 3 in 10, but Cornell is accepting 7% of applicants right now. Right? So over the course of a generation, it's gotten, it's 1/3 as many, less than 1/3, 1/4 as many applicants are being accepted. So you're looking at that, you're like, wow, by the standards of our generation, Generation X, these kids getting into these Ivy League schools are off the charts smart. Higher SAT scores, higher grade point average, more amazing outside activities, and they're all-star kids, right? So here's my question. Why do they seem so dumb? Because and before you're like, oh, Jim, you just sound like, no. Why do they not know which river and which sea they're talking about when they chant from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free? That's not the Pythagorean theorem right there. That's pretty, straightforward. What are you talking about? They want divestment from the universities to divest from Israel with no idea of how divestment works. They don't understand how the university removes that, 1/10 of 1% of their total endowment from Israel. Oh, well, that's going to stop Israel from fighting the war against Hamas. No, it's not. Do you guys understand they don't understand foreign policy. They don't understand the history of Israel. They don't understand the history of Hamas. Hey, don't take it from me. Hillary Clinton is like, these people don't understand, these kids don't understand their own country's history. Never mind the history of the world or the history of the Middle East. So why are they so dumb? Why do they not seem to know anything if they blew the doors off folks like you? Well, at least mine. Greg, you probably did 1,600. But anyway,
no.
we're not running companies. So we're but they seem to know nothing, and yet by these standards, they've changed a little bit, but you'd like to think that a 4.0 student in the 90s and a 4.0 student in the year 2020 shouldn't be phenomenally dumb. And I'm saying, is it the pandemic? Is it learning? Why do they? And so here's my theory, and I don't have proof for this yet. I know a lot of people have suggested this, and I feel like the evidence to support this is starting to mount up. Have schools been admitting idiotic lefties who have the right politics and rejecting kids who are either apolitical or who have the wrong politics? And we don't want a student like that here. So are the students at Ivy League, all these prestigious Ivy League and even non-Ivy League, your top 25, top 50 colleges, are they really dumber? And this indication that they find writing an essay, reading sections of book, that all of this is too hard for them, certainly does indicate that honestly, these schools have been letting idiots in. And the whole point of the Ivy League, besides joining the Harvard Mafia and having some of the most erudite and sophisticated hits on enemies you're ever going to have, is the idea that that there's prestige with this. Well, what if they are? What if they're all a bunch of idiots coming through there? So, I'm sure there are a bunch of people I've always known people at the Ivy Leagues were students. No, I know plenty of people with the Ivy League schools. Back in my day, back when it meant something. And I kind of think it doesn't mean anything right now. So anyway, that is my assessment. I could be entirely wrong on this, but the evidence that there are kids coming into these very prestigious top-of-the-line schools that have allegedly really picky criteria, they're letting in a bunch of drooling morons who just happen to have the right politics, and I don't think that's good for anybody, including the kids themselves.
So if you water down what's expected of them before they apply for college, their GPA is going to look fantastic. I don't know exactly what's on the standardized tests now, the SAT, the ACT, and that sort of thing. But if that's changed in a way that's not as rigorous, those scores will be inflated. And then, yeah, activism versus academics in terms of why you want to come to that college. We're seeing a less than stellar work ethic being developed in the rising generation, and that's not good either. So I don't want to be super Debbie Downer here, but the evidence we're looking at here is not all that encouraging.
The upside is like we can now say we're smarter than Ivy League guys. So, there's that going for us.
There's that. But we also don't want to end with that kind of a taste in your mouth. So very quickly, Jim, a little bit of a kicker. While you were in Ukraine earlier this year, I'm sure you were thoroughly distracted by the speculation that Jets quarterback Aaron Rodgers was on the short list to be Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s vice president, and what that would mean for the upcoming season. Could you run for VP? Could you and play quarterback at the same time? Well, Aaron Rodgers was finally asked about this, and I think, Jim, this will encourage you greatly.
How seriously did things get with RFK about being his running mate? Obviously, we haven't gotten a chance to talk to him since that came out in March.
Yeah, I love Bobby. We had a couple really nice conversations, but there were really two options. It was retire and be his VP or keep playing. And I want to keep playing.
Well, you would have been free after early November. Let's be honest about that. But
or until the other Achilles blows in the second week of the season.
So, Jim, he chose football. He chose you, essentially, over RFK Jr. Don't you feel special?
First of all, this is the first Jets win of the year. We beat RFK Jr. Although maybe beating RFK Jr. isn't that hard. The other thought, it's funny you mentioned, yes, this was going on, the speculation was going on while I was in Ukraine. I did not spend an enormous amount of time thinking about that. While I'm in Ukraine, I'm early morning, going to the hotel for lobby, getting breakfast, and I see the news. The Jets have signed offensive lineman Tyron Smith. Been with the Cowboys, left tackle, by far the best free agent option for the Jets. Still, really good player, and this is the top priority for the Jets in the free agency. And I was so happy, and there was nobody for miles around who would understand why this was important or why the Ukrainians have other Jets on their mind these days, shall we say? So it's just like I'm just walking around wanting to hug people, wanting to feel really excited. Nobody, and just even trying to explain, okay, so there's this football team, and they had a terrible offensive line last year, and Rodgers blew his Achilles, and Zach Wilson is 12 years old and should not be playing quarter. Anyway, there's just no one was going to get all that stuff. So, yeah, happy memories. And I found that in the hotel we stayed at in Moldova, the hotel bar had a Jets helmet behind it, and it was just like, it's calling my name. No matter where I go, I can't get away from these guys.
It's your home. And I just saw a story on ESPN.com yesterday that they think the Jets are the favorites this year. So I'm sure that won't jinx you at all.
Say that. Thanks. Yeah. You're on the ESPN cover. You're on the SI cover and the Madden cover this year. It's both the magazine cover. I guess Sports Illustrated's gone, or you rarely see it anymore.
There's some incarnation of it now. I don't know what's happening.
It's all swimsuit issues with trans people. But anyway, it's the cover of both of them are going to be just a close-up of Aaron Rodgers' other Achilles. And it was like, don't worry, this Achilles is fine. And we all know what's going to happen. So, no, good luck, Aaron Rodgers. And thanks you for picking us over RFK Jr. Because that team looked like a winner.
Jim Garrity, National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks for being with us today. Do be sure to subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already. And also, thank you for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch podcast. Follow us both on X. He's at Jim Garrity. I'm at Dateline_DC. Have a terrific Wednesday and join us again on Thursday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.